belt of gold, crocodile leather shoes, white blouse, button with pearls, a little gold watch, and a leather bag. This is how Jack, the gangster, dresses. The other day Jack took his boys and beat up the Crushers with a baseball bat. Jack thought they'd learn a lesson. But Jerry, the leader of the Shattered Stones, is no slouch. He had his men call in the local police, and a few of them, in collusion, were going to give Jack's men a hard time first. By now Jack was back in New York. His brother, George, had died. Jack was attending a funeral. He finally sees his daughter Lily, but she still doesn't want to forgive her father. Jack had heard from his sister that she had a good life. She had married a husband who treated her well. This gave Jack a little relief. Jack returns to the hotel for the night. The gang leader's son called. He said that the boss was in hospital. He ordered Jack to come to the hospital as soon as possible. Jack's temper flared when he heard this. His own brother had just died. He had prayers to say tomorrow. He'd go back to see the old man when he was done. With that, Jack hung up the phone. As if Jack didn't have enough to worry about, Thomas from Tulsa was in trouble. He was also pulled over by 2 policemen. 2 cops see a black man. They wanted to draw their guns right then and there. "Keep your hands where I can see them. How do I get my papers?" Thomas took out his ID. He told the cops the car belonged to Jack. He was just a driver. He didn't know that the 2 policemen had been set up by the Crushers to cause trouble. When Thomas got out of the car, the other cop handcuffed him without saying a word. There was no charge and no search warrant. The 2 cops didn't give a damn about Thomas's displeasure, but it makes sense that Jack, a gangster, would find weed in the car. There was nothing Thomas could say about it. Taken back to the station, Thomas kept calling Jack, but there was no answer. And so Thomas was thrown into a group prison. At this time Jack arranged a meal for all the relatives after the funeral. At the meal his daughter continued to speak ill of him. Jack kept apologizing, but Lily wasn't buying it. After everyone had raised a glass to George's memory, Lily was the first to leave the table. This left Jack devastated. Jack then went to the hospital. He wanted to see the gang leader who was in hospital. The man whose jaw had been broken saw Jack and wanted revenge. But Jack didn't give in. His gang members were afraid he would die straight away. They rushed to stop him in the middle.
You ought to be a lifeguard, Nico.
Yeah, all right. Go ahead. I'll take more of your fucking money.
Jack didn't care about him. He was about to go to the ward to check on the boss. But the boss's son said he wasn't awake yet. "And the next time I call you, come right away. You already got a cocky spaniel, they come every time." Thomas, who was locked up here, wanted to go to the toilet. The guards told him to pee down the drain, or tell him the code to his phone and he's taken to the toilet. Soon Jack got a phone call, but the caller hung up without saying anything. Sitting next to him was Bobby, who had been arrested. Bobby was brought to Jerry's attention. Bobby almost pissed himself in the face of a shiny dagger. Jerry had contacted the black police and knew through Thomas's phone that their boss was Jack. So they brought Bobby in to ask him what was going on. He didn't do anything to Bobby. Instead, he told him to go back and give Jack a message that he would soon be paying for his crimes. At Jack's restaurant at night, Mickey was picking up a girl, and then Bobby is brought in by 2 cops. But Mickey doesn't panic. It was a very easy situation for him to handle.
You're Mitch, right? AKA Mitch the Stick. We need a word.
No, thanks.
Mitch said in a dominant voice, "You 2 better get the fuck out of my way. You wanna in fucking sign language? I suggest in the strongest of terms, take it down a notch. And I suggest since this establishment is situated on charity land, where you have absolutely no authority, that you get your fat, sorry fucking cottage cheese asses out of here." In the face of Mickey's bullying remarks, the 2 black cops didn't dare say a word. They had to let Bobby go. Here Smith also checked Jerry's file at home. I didn't know that until I looked it up. Once he did, it was a shock. Jerry's criminal history was a bit crazy. Multiple assaults plus multiple homicides. That's when Smith realized he'd followed Jack into the hands of a very dangerous man. The next day Thomas was released from prison. The police told him the car had been impounded elsewhere. His cash and mobile phone had also been confiscated for no reason. If you don't like it, go to court and appeal. There was nothing Thomas could do about it. All this happened in Tulsa. Jack didn't know. He called his brother George's relatives. He wanted to say a final prayer. George was a good man. He'd been a security guard for 20 years. It was a completely different life to Jack's. Although George hadn't been brilliant, but he would be embraced by his family. After paying tribute to his brother, Jack went to his daughter's flower shop in the evening. He still wanted to talk to his daughter. He wanted to be forgiven. But in 18 years Jack had failed completely as a father and husband. His daughter didn't hate him, but the love was almost gone. Seeing how determined his daughter was, Jack still wanted to ask one thing. I don't want to talk about this, let's talk about Uncle Joe. Are you rest in peace? Would you prefer it if it was me? No. Having heard the answer he wanted, Jack was relieved. That's when the daughter remembered the past, the reason she hated her father, besides the fact that he was in prison for the mob. More to the point, Jack's gangster family kept asking for money from her and her mother while he was in prison. To add insult to injury, one of their men, Mark, had humiliated her. When she heard the news, Jack was furious. His daughter was Jack's scourge. The only way to get rid of her is to kill her. The daughter didn't want Jack to spend the rest of his life in prison, so she begs her father not to take revenge. Jack outwardly agrees, but then he went to the hospital. He stood in front of the oldest bit, seeing the dying man in front of him, even though he'd done it to himself. And since Jack had been released from prison, he had been bullied. Jack could ignore all that, but for someone in the gang to touch his daughter, Jack couldn't stand it. That's how Bitter got his life back, but the gang's men would have been dead. Jack went in there and didn't say a word. Jack punched him straight in the face. He took a chair and knocked the man to the ground. Then Jack kicks the man a few times and picks him up and pins him down on the cooker. The others were dumbfounded by what Jack was doing. They didn't even dare to breathe. And that was it. Jack stomped the idiot to death right in front of them. You clean it up. Jack had let his anger go. He had to go back to Jerry to settle the score.
When I play my hand, you won't see it coming.
The two gangs were at war. What will Jack do about it? See you next week for the 6th episode of King of Tulsa.